I sometimes have people who've been practicing for years ask me why their ego still seems to be so intact, why they still feel like they're an individual entity experiencing a world that's different and separate from them. And these are people who are very sincere in their practice. They've studied scriptures, they've watched all of the Advaita YouTube videos, and they have a regular meditation practice. Some of them have had profound spiritual experiences. They firmly believe in the theory of non-duality, but still feel stuck in the very convincing experience of being an individual. And so, not surprisingly, they're wanting and waiting for that experience to change, hoping that one day they'll reach that ultimate state of peace and become enlightened forever. If any of these thoughts or feelings seem recognizable to you, then do keep watching, because in this video I'd like to point out a few of the common misunderstandings and assumptions on the spiritual path that actually perpetuate this sense of separateness, this state of slight uneasiness, and keep it in place. And hopefully by shedding light on these assumptions, they can be dissolved. So for those of you who are new to my channel, I should explain that I'm Catherine, and having lived in an ashram in the Himalayas with a self-realized sage for 15 years, I had the chance for many of my own unwitting assumptions and habits of thinking to be exposed and released. So in these videos, I hope to share some of the insights that I gained through that process. So the first assumption that's really worth looking out for, even while you're watching this video, is, I've heard this all before, I know this. But let's just investigate this thought and the effect that it has. So as I've described in previous videos, which I'll link to actually in the description box below, the ego, or ahankar in Sanskrit, is just the false sense that I am just this mind and body, that this mind-body entity has its own separate reality, and that when this entity dies, when it comes to an end, I'll die, I'll stop existing. But when this ego sense is seen clearly to be fictitious, then the self, the pure awareness, gets the chance to recognize itself as the power behind everything, as the knowingness that permeates everything that's being known, as the beingness that permeates everything in existence. So the purpose of satsang and self-inquiry is simply to kind of neutralize that ego-mind sense, to stop it from acting as an obstruction that gets in the way of the self recognizing itself. But the problem is that this illusory ego-mind sense is so convinced that it is you that it fears its own dissolution, because it subconsciously believes that if it disappears, you disappear. In other words, it thinks that by hanging on, by remaining present, it's saving your life. It's kind of like a fist that's been clenched for so long that it thinks relaxing would mean disappearing, whereas in reality, only the effort disappears, the hand remains. But when we bat off teachings with the belief, yeah, I've heard all that before, I know that, the ego's self-protecting, clenching mechanism is back in full force. And real understanding, direct knowing that would allow the ego to be seen as false, is kept at a kind of conceptual distance. So the thing to remember is, just because you've heard something lots of times and totally believe it on one level, it doesn't mean that it's really known by you in the sense of having become your lived reality. Let's say, for example, that you've heard pure awareness alone is many times. If the mind immediately says, yes, I know that, then that very assumption reduces the power of those words. It reduces something that's limitless and all-encompassing to the level of just another piece of information, something that the mind can choose to pick up or put down again. By doing that, the mind is keeping the truth that might dissolve it at a distance as something other than itself. Whereas actually one of the reasons that regular satsang is so effective is because the truth of the self needs to be heard over and over. It needs to be accepted and understood and brought in over and over as an antidote to the fixity of the ego mind, as a way of gradually weakening that and strengthening self-awareness. And so each time we come to satsang, we need to be willing to listen with fresh ears, with complete openness, as if we're hearing it for the first time. That's what allows the process of Shravan Manan and Nididhyasan, of hearing, reflecting, and actually assimilating, which I talked about in another recent video actually, to take place. But we do have to be prepared to be patient and to repeat this process until it genuinely doesn't need repeating anymore. The second underlying assumption that keeps many people stuck is, I'm a seeker. I'm an individual person studying, or I'm an individual meditating in order to reach enlightenment. Sometimes this shows up in a slightly subtler form where the person thinks, I know ultimately there's no individual, but they still kind of believe that they're the one who needs to realize that. Can you see how this uses the very framework of spiritual seeking to perpetuate the sense of being a separate individual? It places freedom in the future, kind of over there, and you here as someone separate who has to get there. In other words, it's maintaining that structure of separation. So what can we do about this? Whenever you sit down to meditate or study or inquire, you can immediately bring in the very definite knowledge that I am already free. I am pure awareness, fully present, here and now. Nothing needs to be gained. There's nowhere to reach. And then maybe we can offer a silent prayer. Let my real essence unfold and express itself according to its own nature. Another closely related belief is the idea that when enlightenment happens, your day-to-day experience will be completely different. And that therefore you need to replace this experience you're having now with a better one in order to be enlightened. Or if you've experienced a temporary shift of consciousness in the past, perhaps a temporary experience of oneness, then this belief might show up as, I need that experience back. And when it comes back and stays permanently, then I'll be free. But if liberation depended on a particular experience or state of consciousness, what kind of freedom would that really be? True liberation is freedom from all states, not freedom through a particular state. It doesn't come through a change of experience, but through a change in understanding what experience itself actually is. So as long as a particular experience is being used as a measure of truth, liberation will always seem to be somewhere else. This is one of the main themes of the Mandukya Upanishad, which I love, which I cover in the Upanishads course that's coming up soon, actually. The Mandukya looks at how all states of consciousness, waking, dream, and deep sleep, all appear and disappear. But you, the underlying pure awareness, remain always present and unchanged. The Mandukya calls this the fourth state, but it isn't a state of consciousness in the way that the other three are. It's actually the fabric of all the states, the substance of which they're made. So really accepting this as the truth frees you from the habit of using any particular experience as a benchmark for freedom. The final mistaken assumption that I'm going to talk about today is, if I'm experiencing a sense of duality, then I must be stuck in duality. So let's say you've been studying and meditating, but that ego sense, that sense of division, hasn't disappeared. You still notice a sense of separation, and perhaps you feel frustrated with it, caught by it. I mean, it should have gone by now, right? Underlying this sense is the belief that whatever is being experienced must be your reality. But it's precisely the fixation on what's being perceived, as if that defines you, that perpetuates the sense of division. Imagine a plane flying across the sky, leaving a thick trail behind it. If the sky were to fixate on that trail, it might conclude that it's been divided by it, and that it won't be free from the division that that trail has created until the trail has disappeared. But the trail is just a temporary appearance. It simply has no relationship to the sky itself, which remains vast and open and forever indivisible, regardless of what moves through it. In the same way, when your attention fixates on the sense of ego, on the sense of separation, or on rag or dvesh, or on desire and aversion, it's like the sky obsessing over the trail. So what should you do instead? You don't need to push away that sense of separation. You don't need to judge it or eliminate it. And you certainly don't need to give it your attention, because it doesn't define you any more than that trail defines the sky. In fact, by far the most helpful thing is simply to shift your attention back from that sense of division that's being perceived to that which is perceiving, to the pure awareness which is already free and can never be bound by any changing experience. So I hope this video has made it clear that freedom doesn't come from fixing your experience or from waiting for any particular state to arrive. But it can come from recognizing and patiently undoing the assumptions that quietly shape how your experience is being interpreted. So spiritual practice, sadhana, involves repeatedly placing yourself in environments where this can take place without a sense of individual doing in it. And then clarity is what remains. And that doesn't come by trying to get rid of the ego, but by letting the assumptions and misunderstandings that sustain the ego gradually fall away through steady exposure to that which is true. And of course, that which is true is you. Pure, free, forever, eternal awareness. Bye for now.